Tony Stark, Iron Man, augmenting himself with technology. Let's get to the mountaintop of this episode. As he's augmenting himself with technology, we have this moment where he is fought his way out of the cave in one suit, had kind of a terrible experience, but changed his mindset, realized that there were some problems in the world that he had created, goes out in the suit again, goes out in the new suit to go clean up some messes, comes back with a bunch of bullet holes in the suit, and he's getting ready to go out and do it again. And he has this confrontation with his loyal sidekick and enabler, Pepper Potts. So take us into this, Drew. What happens in this scene, and what do you like about this?
Yeah, so this scene happens when Tony is about to put the suit back on and go back out after, like you mentioned earlier, he keeps coming back with bullet holes in him and everything's scuffed up and the technology doesn't quite work exactly as he intended, or Tony's not capable of wielding it quite properly yet. He just keeps putting himself in the face of more and more harm, which, in a way, that is kind of consistent with his character. He is super confident and he believes that he can solve any problem and that he can just be the face and be out there. So we can easily empathize with Pepper Potts when she tries to have this confrontation with Tony. She says, Tony, if you put back on the suit, I'm going to quit. And it's interesting because both Potts and Tony share their character here. While Potts' character is static in this moment, she's continuing to be loyal. She's continuing to be, wise and challenge Tony, even when it's hard for people to challenge Tony because of the type of way that he responds. And then you get Tony, who's a dynamic character, and he starts to change here because he's not abrasive. Instead, he's empathetic, understanding of why she comes in that perspective. And also, he says, I can never not put on the suit now because he's been irreversibly changed. As we talked about in episode 1, his experience with Yinsen, his experience seeing firsthand the impact of the technology that he creates, it changed him. It made him see that he has to do something different. This is the beginning of Tony's redemption arc. This is him going from the playboy engineer who, can do anything, can be as confident, can be the face that people respect, to being somebody who's a hero and eventually a leader that people can look up to and follow. So, Brian, I saw this quote and I can't find the source of it. So, unfortunately, even when it was quoted, I couldn't find the source of it. But successful people are respected, but redeemed people are admired. And I think that is the transition of Tony's story arc across from this first movie in Iron Man all the way through to Avengers Endgame.
Yeah, and this scene is, like you say, he goes from only caring about himself to at least caring about cleaning up his own messes to like, oh, maybe that job's not done, right? Maybe just because I stopped making the world worse isn't sufficient, right? Maybe I should actually start making the world better. And what's interesting about the way Pepper's reaction is portrayed in this, right, is that she has been a loyal friend and a loving, supporting person in his life, enabling him for as far as we can tell forever, right? Even when he was creating weapons of mass destruction, like even when he was like without a thought abusing everybody around him and creating all this stuff, like she's just her purpose is much narrower in this context. Like she's just there to make sure that he's relatively healthy and able to do the things that he wants to do, and she's sort of trusting him to make good decisions, even when he obviously isn't. But the reason she's upset at this point is not because she objects to violence, right? She's been supporting an arms dealer for her entire career, right? Like it's not because she doesn't think fighting is a good thing or she wants to discourage violence or whatever. It's just because of the risk to him that this new thing in his life is that he's taken on responsibility, but he's also putting himself in harm's way in the service of doing these things. And what she says, like, yeah, you're all I have too. You're the only person that I actually care about. So the reason I'm upset is because I don't want to lose you. So she really, her focus and purpose is visionary and nurturing and compassionate, but very focused on him. right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the thing that he violates in his relationship with her, is that he's putting himself sort of casually at risk. And she is willing to trust him enough to go put herself at risk, right? The next thing that happens is she goes and has to go face Obi in the office and potentially get herself in trouble to help him solve his problems and to help Tony sort of on his redemption arc. So she has to buy into not only allowing him to do these things or supporting him to do these things, but actually putting herself at risk at the same time. So it's another one of those, virtue is a strong word for it, but that, values and that approach propagates through the people around you.
Yeah, the conflict is required. That's why I liked this scene as our mountaintop moment, even though, as a lot of times on Wonder Tour, we might choose some mountaintop moments that are spectacular and like the pinnacle of cinema, and other ones are just going to be these like off dialogues between the characters where we see the change start to show before we get the change in full force, when Tony sacrifices himself kind of at the end of this movie to try to get rid of Obi.
Yeah, yeah, and that he, again, at the end, in the press conference at the end, that he takes responsibility. Like, no, I am actually going to be a hero. I'm going to commit to being a hero in the public eye, which means I can't get out of it. I can't decide to stop. Right. So that's a very different. I am Iron Man requires, like we said earlier, stopping being the former version of Tony Stark at some point.
It does, and this moment we like to again. It seems like on Wonder Tour sometimes we keep rehashing the same things over and over from slightly different perspectives, and I think that's kind of the point. It's not all the same things, right? But the
Right.
more we can shape our models, our mindsets around these things, the more we can go and take in micro learnings and go practice them, the more we can become that magnanimous character slowly but surely. And so this moment, this conflict, it gives way to this realization. And Tony doesn't have this realization necessarily in this movie. He starts to, but this is the realization that he will have over the course of this entire Marvel Cinematic Universe phases 1 through 3 arc. And it's one of our Wonder Tour principles that he goes from this original viewpoint of true power is having the biggest weapon, which is a paraphrase of the Howard Stark quote, to the Wonder Tour principle of true power is in sacrifice.
Right. True power is in influencing other people through your example, so you can force multiply that way. Right. That's Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very different kind of hero arc, right? Like the Luke Skywalker, the young, fresh-faced farm boy who wants to have an adventure and just has to learn skills and has to learn philosophy and has to learn how to become a leader, is one kind of hero arc. But this is something I think, the reason these stories are powerful for us is we can see ourselves in them, right? I think a lot of us can potentially see ourselves like in the middle of your life, like, I've accomplished some things, I've been successful, I feel like I'm good at something, I feel like I've got some momentum built up here, right? Like I've sort of figured out who I want to be. Remembering to keep examining that, remembering to, like, okay, what purpose was I after in the first place, and am I still aligned to that, or am I having the impact that I thought, or what am I doing with the people around me, like that. Remembering to examine that even in midlife, and you may need to make some course corrections, you may need to flower into a different version of yourself, is when you're feeling your best, when you're feeling your most confident and your most cocky and your most hyper competent and all that, like, hey, okay, am I being Tony Stark right now? Like, am I, is that because I am actually just like hitting on all cylinders, or is it because I've made it all about me and so it feels good in the moment? And I think that's a good, thinking about the Tony Stark archetype is a good way to sort of reality check that. That's a different flavor of having to reset on the hero's journey, or a flavor of having to reset your own leadership role.
Yeah, and that's why on Wonder Tour we talk about in order to be able to learn, sometimes we need to make mountains out of molehills in terms of stories. We need to like draw it up to a higher level, because in your everyday life, the decisions that you make, sometimes it's a little more mundane, and these micro decisions, it's like it's hard to tell that you're having to choose between wisdom and folly every single time, when in reality that is effectively what's happening. most of us don't have too many of these huge Tony Stark moments, but we do have a lot of everyday moments. And being able to see things in this blown up version in these superhero movies or whatever helps us to be prepared for those everyday decisions.
Yeah, I like that, and that really that's I think that helps us put a pin in what we talked about in the previous episode with Iron Man about this sort of leadership role and what the reflections that you have to do. Bringing it back to the technology piece, right? You know, this idea of the person in the suit, right? The technology is makes you Iron Man. The technology makes you it can make you fly, it can make you stronger, it can make you less vulnerable, but it's still you. Like the leader assisted by technology, the engineer assisted by technology should still be taking ownership of their actions, be designing technology so that humans can decide on their purposes and enact it more powerfully in the world, not that you should absolve yourself of responsibility and go press a button and whatever decision the machine makes is the correct credit rating for that person or the correct person to let into the building or the correct hiring decision. Absolving yourself of responsibility is maybe not what we would suggest as the magnanimous leader is not the correct use of technology. And so the suit analogy is really good. Like, I'm still in there, I'm still making decisions, I'm still deciding on the actions.